Northern pike. Northern pike eat other northern pike, including individuals close to their own size. It's a rate of cannibalism unusually high even by the standards of an already predatory family. It works because of their mouth. Rows of teeth hinged backward fold flat to let prey slide down the throat, then snap upright so nothing can work its way back out. That hinge is paired with a stomach and throat capable of stretching around prey nearly as long as the pike itself, which is also exactly why northern pike show up so often in fishing folklore, choking to death on prey they misjudged the size of. The same anatomy that makes them nearly unbeatable ambush predators is the same anatomy that occasionally kills them. And this isn't a fish confined to one lake or even one country. Northern pike hold the widest natural range of any esid on Earth, found across much of Canada, the northern United States, and throughout northern Europe and Asia. That range is wide enough to be essentially circumpolar, present in cold freshwater systems across 3 continents, without a single introduction required to get there. That combination, a jaw engineered to never let go, and a range spanning the entire top of the planet, is the baseline the rest of this family gets measured against. Everything else in the pike lineage is a variation on this exact design.
Muskellunge. Anglers call it the fish of 10,000 casts. The muskellunge, the musky, is the largest member of the entire pike family, capable of exceeding 4 feet and regularly outgrowing every other esosid sharing its range. But size alone doesn't explain the nickname. Scarcity does. Musky are territorial, solitary ambush predators that don't tolerate crowding. Even in healthy musky water, that territoriality means far fewer individuals per acre than comparable pike or pickerel habitats supports. So unlike northern pike, which you might stumble into almost anywhere cold water exists, a musky's range is far more concentrated and far more sensitive to habitat quality. That range is centered on the Great Lakes Basin and parts of the upper Mississippi and St. Lawrence drainages, a fraction of the northern pike spread across 3 continents. Put the low density and the narrow range together and you get an animal that can be genuinely difficult to locate, let alone hook. That's the fish of 10,000 casts in one sentence. Not an impossible catch, but one where the odds are stacked about as hard against an angler as freshwater fishing gets.
Chain pickerel. Chain pickerels strike with a level of aggression wildly out of proportion to their size. It's not random behavior, it's a survival requirement. In the dense, weed-choked shallows this fish calls home, there's no chance for a second attempt. A hesitant or partial strike just lets the prey vanish into cover. So chain pickerel commit fully, every time. Backing up that aggression is a proportionally larger mouth than you'd expect for its body size. Mid-sized among esox, smaller than either the northern pike or the muskellunge, but built to make the most of every strike it takes. Native across much of the eastern United States, the chain pickerel gets its name from the dark, interlocking chain-like pattern running across a greenish-gold body. That pattern isn't decorative, it's camouflage, precisely suited to the vegetation-choked shallows the species prefers over open water. The same habitat that makes its all-or-nothing striking style necessary in the first place. Smaller than a pike, smaller than a musky, but built top to bottom around never wasting a strike.
Tiger muskellunge. There's a member of this family that isn't really a species at all, and fisheries departments stock it on purpose specifically because it can't reproduce. The tiger muskellunge is a hybrid, the natural or hand-bred cross of a muskellunge and a northern pike. It occurs on its own wherever the 2 parent species overlap in the wild, but most individuals swimming in lakes today came from a hatchery. Biologists prefer crossing a male northern pike with a female muskellunge, since muskellunge eggs are less sticky and clump together less during hatching. The hybrid is almost always sterile. Males essentially never produce viable offspring, and while some females can occasionally back-cross with a parent species, a self-sustaining wild population of tiger muskellunge basically doesn't happen. That sterility turns out to be the whole point. Fisheries managers stock tiger muskellunge specifically because the population can't spiral out of control on its own, making it a low-risk trophy fish and, in some lakes, a deliberate predator introduced to knock down an overabundant prey species. Sterility comes with a bonus. Because it isn't spending energy on reproduction, the tiger muskellunge redirects that energy into raw growth, a phenomenon called hybrid vigor, One study found it puts on size roughly 1.5 times faster than a pure muskellunge, tolerating warmer water in the process. You can pick it out from a true muskellunge at a glance: a rounded tail fin instead of a pointed one, and bold, irregular vertical bars, the tiger stripes, where a true muskellunge shows a more scattered, spotted pattern. For years before anyone crossed the two parent species deliberately, this fish was assumed to be its own distinct species. It isn't one, and today it's manufactured precisely so it never becomes one.
Redfin pickerel. Picture a fully formed pike. Same jaw, same ambush instincts, same predatory blueprint, shrunk down small enough to live in a roadside ditch. That's the redfin pickerel, a small eastern U.S. subspecies rarely exceeding a foot in length, distinguished by the reddish coloration along its lower fins that gives the fish its name. It lives in small, sluggish streams, ponds, and swampy backwaters, water too small or too warm to support any of the family's larger members at all. At that scale, its role in the ecosystem shifts entirely. Where a northern pike or muskellunge sits at the top of a lake's food chain, the redfin pickerel functions closer to a small predatory minnow, preying on insects, small crustaceans, and tiny fish in habitats where its giant relatives would struggle to find enough space or large enough prey to survive. Same body plan, same instincts, an entirely different world to hunt in, one that opens up water none of its larger relatives could ever use.
Grass pickerel. Somewhere in the Midwest, there's a fish that evolved almost the exact same survival strategy as the redfin pickerel, independently in a completely different part of the country. The grass pickerel is typically classified as the western subspecies counterpart to the redfin, occupying a broadly similar small stream and vegetated pond niche, but distributed further west and inland through the Midwest and into the Mississippi drainage. It carries its own camouflage, a fine, worm-like vermiculated pattern across the body, distinct from the redfin's coloring and suited to the dense aquatic vegetation it favors. That pattern fits a trend across the whole family, coloration tracking habitat closely, from the northern pike's open water blotching to the chain pickerel's chain link markings to this fine vermiculation built for thick weed beds. The two miniature pickerels are so alike in size, habitat, and behavior that field identification usually comes down to subtle coloring and geography rather than any real difference in how they live. The same evolutionary answer arrived at twice in two separate corners of the pickerel family's combined range.
Amur pike. Every pike species so far lives in North America or Europe. This one doesn't. The amur pike is the only pike species native to Asia, restricted to the Amur River basin along the border between eastern Russia and northeastern China. That isolation did something to it genetically. Cut off in that river system for long enough, its population diverged from the wider northern pike lineage and became genetically distinct in its own right, not simply the eastern edge of the northern pike's range, the way it might first appear on a map. The divergence shows visually, too. Rounded, discrete dark spots arranged across the flanks, rather than the coarser, more irregular blotching typical of northern pike. Aside from that pattern and its restricted range, the amur pike runs the exact same core strategy as the rest of its family: ambush predation from dense cover in the cold, slow-moving stretches of river and floodplain wetland the Amur Basin provides. One continent, one river system, one species quietly running the family playbook in near-total isolation. Aquitanian pike. Until 2014, biologists thought every pike in Western Europe was the exact same fish. Then, genetic analysis on pike native to rivers of the Aquitaine region in southwestern France, including the Adour and Charente drainages, came back wrong. Consistently, unmistakably wrong. These fish carry genetic differences distinct enough to describe as an entirely separate species, the aquitanian pike. That makes it a cryptic species, one whose existence was effectively invisible without genetic testing, hiding in plain sight inside a fish that anglers and biologists alike had been calling by the wrong name for as long as anyone had been paying attention. Its native range is narrow, confined to a specific cluster of river systems in southwestern France, but isolated enough from the broader northern pike range across the rest of the continent that the genetic split had time to become fixed rather than blurring back together through interbreeding. A species nobody knew existed for centuries, uncovered not by looking harder at the fish, but by looking at its DNA.
Cisalpine pike. There's a species of pike in northern Italy that scientists confirmed less than 10 years ago, and it may not survive long enough for most people to ever learn its name. The Cisalpine pike was described in the same 2014 study that identified the Aquitanian pike. It's native to the Po River basin of northern Italy, a region historically known as Cisalpine Gaul, which gives the species its name. Like its French counterpart, it's difficult to distinguish from northern pike on appearance alone. Genetics is the only thing that gave it away. But unlike the aquitanian pike, the Cisalpine pike's isolation has already been compromised. Northern pike have been widely introduced and stocked into Italian waters for sport fishing over the past century, and because the two species can interbreed, the Cisalpine pike's distinct genetic identity is being steadily diluted through hybridization across much of its native range. That makes it one of the more urgent freshwater fish conservation concerns in Italy today, a species identified as scientifically distinct only recently, already at risk of effectively disappearing back into the more common relative it was just proven not to be.
Southern pike. For decades, every pike south of the Alps was assumed to be the exact same fish found everywhere else in Europe. A genetic study proved something stranger than that. Pike native to Italy, southern France, and Switzerland turned out to be more distantly related to their northern European neighbors than either group is to pike an ocean away. Genetic testing found that pike from northern Europe are actually closer relatives of pike in Canada and China than they are to pike living a few hundred miles south of them on the same continent. A gap that traces back to the two groups surviving in separate refuges during the last ice ages, then never fully remixing once the ice retreated. That split earned the southern population its own species status, the southern pike, and the discovery came with an odd wrinkle. Two separate research teams identified it independently within months of each other in the same year, giving it two different scientific names before taxonomic priorities settled on one and demoted the other to a footnote. Physically, the two species are close enough to fool most anglers. The giveaway is a difference in skin color pattern, round, discrete spots on northern fish versus a different marking style on southern ones, along with a measurably lower scale count running along the lateral line of the southern population. Two teams working independently arrived at the same conclusion in the same year. The pike anglers had been catching across southern Europe for centuries was never the same fish everyone assumed it was.